The neon red glow of the on-air sign buzzed faintly in the corner of the cramped radio booth, casting long shadows across the walls lined with vinyl records and cassette tapes. Danny, the Wolf Wilkes, leaned back in his squeaky chair, his boots propped on the edge of the soundboard. The station was a relic of the past, but it suited him. Late-night radio was where the forgotten lived, the insomniacs, the wanderers, the truckers with coffee-stained thermoses. It was where Danny could be someone. "All right, night owls," he purred into the microphone, his voice rich and raspy, honed from years of whiskey and cigarettes. "You're tuned into Midnight Howl, the station that keeps you company while the rest of the world sleeps. I'm your host, Danny the Wolf Wilkes, and I'm here to howl through the night with you. Let's take another call. Line 3, you're live." Static hissed over the line. For a moment, Danny thought no one was there. Then came a voice soft, almost a whisper. "Hello, Danny." Something about the tone stopped him cold. There was no excitement, no nerves, just an eerie familiarity. "Hey there, stranger," he said, keeping his tone light. "What's on your mind tonight?" The voice paused, then chuckled, a dry, hollow sound that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. "Do you remember Elm Street, 1981? Danny's hand froze over the controls. His heart thudded, a deep, uncomfortable rhythm. Elm Street. The summer of 81. He hadn't thought about that night in years. "I think you've got the wrong guy," he said quickly, clearing his throat. "Anyway, thanks for calling. Let's keep the lines moving." He cut the call and leaned back in his chair, exhaling a shaky breath. He shook it off. Weirdos like that weren't uncommon on his show. A little too much booze, a little too much late-night paranoia, and you'd get all sorts of nonsense. "All right, let's try line 5, he said, injecting forced cheer into his voice. But the calls got stranger. One caller whispered, "You shouldn't have left her there, Danny." Another said, "Does she haunt your dreams? I bet she does." By 3 May, the booth felt smaller, darker. The fluorescent lights above flickered, casting odd shadows over the cluttered desk. Danny's usual confidence, the swagger that had carried him through years in the business, was unraveling. His fingers trembled as he pressed the button for the next line. He needed to keep going, to stay in control. "Line 7, he said, his voice tight. "You're on the air." "Still playing the Wolf, huh?" The voice on the line sneered. This one was sharper, crueler, always the big man. "But I know the truth. We all know the truth." Danny's stomach churned. "Who's this? You tell me?" the caller replied. Then the line filled with something Danny hadn't heard in years, a girl's laughter, faint and haunting. He slammed the button to end the call, his hand shaking. The laughter lingered in his ears, even as the booth fell silent except for the faint hum of the equipment. He stared at the phone, his reflection warped in its glossy surface. The memories were clawing their way back, memories he'd buried deep. The summer of 81, a car, a girl. Danny stood abruptly, pacing the tiny room. He lit a cigarette with unsteady hands, the flame of the lighter flickering wildly. He couldn't let this get to him. He'd built his whole life on leaving the past behind, on forgetting. The phone rang again. Danny stared at it, the shrill sound cutting through the heavy silence. Don't answer it, he thought. Just play some music and leave. But his hand moved on its own, picking up the receiver. Who is this? He demanded, his voice raw. The line crackled, and then the voice came through, clear as day. It's Claire. Danny froze, his breath hitched. No, he whispered. No, it can't be. You left me, the voice said, trembling with rage. You left me there to die. Danny stumbled back, the phone slipping from his hand. It clattered onto the desk, but the voice continued, louder now, echoing through the speakers. I didn't mean to, he stammered. It wasn't my fault. Claire's voice screamed, the sound distorted, inhuman. The fluorescent lights above flickered wildly, plunging the booth into darkness for half a second before they buzzed back to life. The on-air sign glowed brighter, almost pulsing. Danny fell into his chair, his heart pounding. He fumbled with the controls, trying to play a record, anything to drown out the sound. But the soundboard was dead. The lights on the console blinked erratically, like a machine on the brink of collapse. The summer of '81, Elm Street. Claire in the passenger seat, laughing, the moonlight catching her blonde hair. The way her smile faltered when they argued, the sharp edge in her voice when she told him to stop the car, and then the crash. Danny shook his head violently, trying to push the images away. He told himself for years it wasn't his fault. She'd been drinking too. She distracted him, but the voices wouldn't let him forget. "You ran," one of them said, cold and accusing. "You left her there, broken and bleeding, and you ran." "No," Danny screamed, his voice cracking. "I didn't mean to. I was scared." The booth went deathly quiet. Danny sat there, trembling, his face buried in his hands. Then, from the corner of the room, he heard it. Footsteps. He lifted his head slowly, his eyes darting to the shadows pooling near the door. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice barely above a whisper. The shadows shifted, coalescing into a figure. It was Claire. Her face was pale, her eyes sunken and dark. Blood stained her once white dress, and her blonde hair hung in matted tangles around her shoulders. She stepped forward, her bare feet leaving wet, red prints on the tile floor. "Time to face the music, Danny," she said, her voice eerily calm. Danny scrambled back, knocking over his chair. "Stay away from me," he shouted. But Claire kept coming, her movements slow and deliberate. The on-air sign buzzed violently, casting the room in flashes of red. "You don't get to run anymore," she said. "Not this time." Danny's back hit the wall. He was cornered, the desk to his left, the records to his right. "I'm sorry," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry." Claire tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "Sorry doesn't change anything," she said. Her voice was layered now hers, and the voices of all the callers, echoing and overlapping. The lights in the booth went out completely, plunging Danny into darkness. For a moment, there was silence. Then the sound of static filled the air, louder and louder, until it was deafening. Danny screamed, the noise swallowing him whole. The next morning, the station manager found the booth empty. The on-air sign was still glowing, casting its dim red light over the soundboard. The records were spinning in their cases, but no music played. Danny Wilkes was never seen again. But late at night, when the station goes silent, some say you can hear his voice crackling over the airwaves, whispering a single word. "Sorry."